Hello Rayclast, it is Zambash here, coming with another build guide, this time for the Marohi Deathquake Slayer that I've been playing in the Legion League. This build takes advantage of several of the new toys that we got in the 3.7 Legion expansion, including the revamped Slayer class and the really cool revamped Marohi Urki unique mace. This build is probably my favorite new build that I've ever played. It plays really differently than most things in Path of Exile these days, so it was a really nice change of pace. And it is definitely one of the strongest, if not the strongest build I've ever played, which isn't really surprising with a new league because, you know, we get power creep every league, so everything is always the strongest each time. As usual, you'll find a Path of Building link in the description of this video. I strongly encourage you to check that out if you are wanting to look at the details closely. In this guide, we'll be doing the usual walkthrough and talking about why we made certain choices, but all of the details should be in the Path of Building. And I've included timestamps here on this intro page if you want to skip to specific sections that you are more interested in. We'll start by talking about a few general pros and cons of the build. For pros, the build has fast clear speed, at least for melee. Some of the new toys with the new Shockwave gem and changes to gem radiuses and scaling and new supporting skills have made Earthquake AoE really huge. You clear about 1.5 screens per Earthquake in a dense map on this character. The damage on the build is absolutely insane, probably the highest damage build I've ever made. Once you get all your gear and gem links and stuff online, you hit an average hit of about 2 million damage per Earthquake when taking into consideration the different effects that go off with each Earthquake. It has a really high impact feeling and a really satisfying playstyle. Most things in POE these days look like you're swinging around a toothpick because everything's just so fast, but this build maintains a good level of clear and strength while having just really high impact play with really slow individual hits. It is effective on a pretty small budget. All you really need to get going is a 5-link Marohi Urki and you could probably clear everything in the game, but there's plenty of room to grow if you want to invest more into it to hit those really insane damage numbers. For cons, the build requires pretty skillful positioning. It is not like some maybe Juggernaut melee builds where you can really just stand in front of stuff and eat hits. Because of the slow nature of the attacks that we use with the Marohi Urki and not being a Juggernaut with insane levels of mitigation, it does require some positioning. You can't just throw them off willy-nilly or you'll get tagged by a bunch of damage and probably go down. Another con, it requires a lot of stats, specifically int and dex on gear, which can be kind of a pain to get sometimes. And finally, this really ties in with the first one, the slow hits can take some time to get used to. Initially it might feel like you're going slow because you attack slow, but when you see how much AoE it clears, you realize you're actually clearing very quickly. It just takes some getting used to get used to that slow playstyle that is so uncommon in PoE these days. Because this build is entirely centered around a specific item, we will go ahead and talk about items next. Of course, the most important item for a Marohi build is the Marohi Urki itself. This is a unique two-handed mace that was buffed in the 3.7 Legion expansion. It now is supported by Pulverize, which is a new gem where it used to be supported by increased AoE, and the damage was buffed, so it is now a 500 plus DPS weapon with a good roll. And the important thing about it for Earthquake is not specifically that it's 500 DPS plus, that's not too special for a two-hander, it's the fact that it's 500 DPS with less than 1 base attack per second. You definitely need this for the build, and a 5-link will get you going just fine, and in fact a 4-link will probably clear most content for you. While the Marohi Urki is the only strictly required unique item for this build, there are a couple others that are very helpful, one of them being the Carcass Jack. This is the go-to chest for AoE builds whenever you're able to fit it in, because of the large boosts it gives to both your area of effect and your area damage, and it has a decent life roll and some resists to boot. The next slot where I feel there are some good unique options is for your helmet. I chose the Rat's Nest on this character. Starkanja's is also really good. There's a crit character and both of those helmets give bonus crit, with the Rat's Nest giving extra movement speed and more bonus crit compared to the Starkanja's, while the Starkanja's gives you some more health. So it's basically a trade-off between survivability and damage. Either way, you definitely want to go for the 30% reduced Earthquake duration helmet enchant. This can be kind of a spendy enchant depending on which base you go for and just how people are feeling on the day that they're selling, but it definitely makes the build feel a lot better, though it is technically playable without this helmet enchant when you get started. For the flasks on this build, I recommend the usual standby in my builds of the Catalyzed Eternal Life Flask of Staunching. For unique flasks, you're going to want a Lion's Roar, that's going to give you a pretty large damage boost. Then you're going to want a Diamond Flask and a Basalt Flask. I recommend Chemist's prefixes so you can use them more often. And between the two of those, you need heat and warding suffixes for comfortable mapping. And finally, to get yourself around quickly, you need a Chemist's Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. Finally, for items, for your jewels, there are a couple good unique jewels to use in this build. One is the Tempered or Transcendent Flesh Jewel, which comes from the Temple. It is really good this patch now, thanks to some changes on the passive tree. If you stick it in the slot just to the left of the Marauder, it gives you 70 crit multiplier, and if you get the Transcendent Flesh version, it'll give you 4% physical mitigation on top of that, which is worth an extra endurance charge. The Tempered version is super cheap, the Transcendent version is a little harder to get your hands on, so go with whichever one you can afford. Next up, another good unique jewel is Watcher's Eye with the Intimidation mod for the new Pride aura. Makes it so when you're affected by Pride, your hits intimidate enemies. That'll make them take 10% more damage from attacks. And finally, you've got one more jewel slot in the build. You just want to fill up a rare jewel with life. Mana Leech if you need it. You're going to need Mana Leech somewhere on your items, where that could be a prefix on gloves or rings or an amulet. But if you don't get it in any of those places, make sure you get a Mana Leech roll on that rare jewel, and then any combination of damage stats to round it out. Next, we will talk about the gem setups for this build, which really help bring it together with the new Marohi and some of the new support gems. Your main setup in your Marohi Urki is going to be Earthquake, Increased Area of Effect, which gets swapped for Concentrated Effect for single target. Fortify, which gives you tankiness and now has a nice more multiplier on it, so it is usable as a main damage gem. Brutality, Shockwave, and melee physical damage. If you're only on a 5-link, just drop that melee physical damage. Shockwave is what really makes this build shine. It is a new support gem. Basically, it adds a second attack that triggers when you land the main attack that it is linked to. That new attack is called Shockwave, and it is supported by all of the other linked gems that are supporting the main attack. So your Increased Area of Effect, Fortified, Brutality, Melee Fizz, those all support the Shockwave attack as well. It has a really large radius, does really large base damage, and it has a cooldown that goes down to about 0.74 seconds, which happens to be very close to the duration on your Earthquake when you get the 30% reduced Helm enchant, which will bring that to 0.7 seconds. So all you need to do is make sure that with all of your buffs and stuff on all together that you're going to have on bosses, you want your attack time to be slower than the cooldown of Shockwave. That'll make it so that you get a Shockwave and an Earthquake Aftershock on every single attack of Earthquake, and that is what makes Marohi so ideal for an Earthquake build like this, is because its slow speed allows you to accomplish that condition very easily, making sure you get both an Aftershock and a Shockwave on every attack. With all those things going off together with every attack added up is how we get an average damage of nearly 2 million per attack. For your supporting setups, you're going to want an Ancestral Warchief to buff your damage, and it does great damage on its own if you support it with multiple totems, Maim, Brutality, and Concentrated Effect in a 5-link. Just ditch Brutality or Concentrated Effect if you don't have the links to support this greatly. It is important that you have Maim though, because that also boosts your damage, because enemies maimed by the Warchief will take extra physical damage from all sources. Next up is a Flame Dash for mobility. You'll see that I use this for quick repositioning and dashing around immediately between earthquakes and the footage behind. This is especially useful for dealing with some of the really dangerous Legion mobs that shoot out really powerful ranged attack skills and spells. Just shoot earthquakes and flame dashes in rapid succession, and that'll keep you really safe while you're putting out all of your damage. You can use regular dash, the new skill that was added, if you want, but flame dash is essentially better in every way. It's got multiple charges, it's got a longer range, and as long as you're not spamming it consecutively, it has the same instant cast time as the new dash. You need a Blood Rage somewhere. This keeps up your frenzy charges while you're mapping, and it is our sole source of life leech in the build, so it helps a lot with our sustain, and it gives some nice attack speed. Just remember that you don't want your attack time to be any shorter than the cooldown on your Shockwave. Definitely want an Enduring Cry. This is our way we keep up endurance charges, which is our main sort of mitigation in this build. Next up, a War Banner. War Banner's been really strong ever since it was introduced, and it adds a lot of damage to the build, and it now gives accuracy as well, which is imperative for crit builds. Next up, you need Blood and Sand, Pride, and Precision. I've got these linked to an Enlighten, level 3. If you can't get a decent Enlighten to reduce the mana reservation, you'll probably have to drop Blood and Sand until you can afford that. I think War Banner, Pride, and Precision are all more important. And then finally, for some added utility, you've got Cast when Damage Taken with Molten Shell. Molten Shell is really strong now, especially when you combine it with your Lion's Roar Flask, giving you extra armor. All your evasion getting converted with Iron Reflexes gives you a really nice buff shell for a couple seconds. And of course you've got Temporal Chains and an Ice Golem. Ice Golem boosting your accuracy and crit again, and Temporal Chains could be reduced or replaced with whatever curse you want. I think Temp Chains is the way to go. I know a lot of people like Enfeeble, but I figure if you've already been hitting to trigger your cast when damage taken, then it doesn't really matter if you Enfeeble again. I would rather have Temp Chains so the second round of attacks comes out slower. Now we will take a quick break from the action to take an in-depth look at the passive tree for this character. Of course, since you're a Slayer, you're starting as a Duelist, and the goal of this build is crits, so we are going to take advantage of many of the new melee crit wheels on the tree. Start by heading down through the Duelist area and grabbing your generic two-handed nodes. While you're leveling early on, I don't recommend trying to force crit as it's just not very practical, so I started by just heading out toward the Marauder area and picking up these two plain two-hander wheels on the way there. Those will give you nice damage while you're leveling. Round that out through the Marauder, and you might even want to pick up Resolute Technique. Pick up the Mace nodes, the whole wheel probably while you're leveling for as much damage as you can. And I didn't respec into crits until after the Cruel Lab, and I was using my Marohi Urki. Once you get your Cruel Lab, you will pick up the Overwhelm node. I recommend starting with the Impact node in your normal lab, then going Overwhelm in the Cruel Lab, and then going up the Headsman and Bane of Legends for your Merciless and Uber labs. Overwhelm is what lets you go crit. Impact is nice early on for leveling because the bonus AoE and damage is really solid for getting you through the axe quickly. For your bandits, you want to help Alira, as is common for most crit builds, and once you respec to your crit, you'll get rid of these generic two-hander nodes and start going into some of the melee crit wheels, like this generic one. Down here is a very nice two-handed specific crit wheel, and up here you've got your usual crit wheel and a new crit wheel specifically for maces. Make sure you pick up all your endurance charges. They're a major form of mitigation. Over here is that Transcendent Flesh Jewel I mentioned. It sucks up all the strength in the area to give you a ton of crit multiplier and some nice extra physical damage reduction. And finally, a couple keystones to note are Unwavering Stance. Because we attack so slowly with our windup on Earthquake, it is really important that you don't get stunned during that, so you need Unwavering Stance for stun immunity. You don't want to use Calm's Roots or anything on this build because just running around is your main form of mobility, so you definitely need move speed boots. And then down here we also take Iron Reflexes. This is because we used a Rat's Nest, in your case you might use a Starkonja's instead, and a Carcass Jack, which both have a lot of evasion, so converting all of our evasion into armor pairs really nice with all the endurance charges we pick up, and we can't evade anyways because we picked Unwavering Stance, which is mandatory for the stun immunity. Make sure you pick up the Scion Life Wheel whenever you're feeling like you need more life, and you'll round out this tree for level 93. If you don't quite want to go up to 93, you could drop a couple of endurance charges, you could drop a little extra life, maybe this little accuracy and crit wheel, but 93 is where I plan most of my trees for these days. Finally, for your Pantheon, focusing on things that pair well with our slow attack speed and our need to get some extra tankiness in, we use Solaris with the Joris upgrade. This makes it so that we can't be chain crit when we're doing our big Earthquake windup and large packs are firing into us. Super important, particularly on maps that are rolled with crit mods. And for your Minor God, most of the time I recommend Gruthkol with Arabics. Adds some nice tankiness to you and makes it so that you slow enemies that you hit with your attacks. This is especially useful on some of the Shaper Guardians that have powerful attacks that's nice to slow down their attack speed. And finally, particularly for one fight, namely the Constrictor Elder Guardian, I switched to Shikari with the Terror of the Infinite Drifts upgrade. That gives you poison immunity. You could just swap in a Curing Flask if you want to. And on that note, it's also very nice to swap in a Dousing Flask when you're doing the Enslaver Elder Guardian because he puts some really nasty ignites on you. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you've had fun, learned something, and been inspired to go and make a build of your own. This build turned out really fun and strong. As you can see, it doesn't even have to do smoke phases on Chimera because you can insta-phase him, you can skip bullet hell phases on Shaper by doing so much damage, and in this, which was definitely my cleanest Uber Elder fight ever, just one death from warping into some balls, you can take down the phases in 1 to 2 earthquakes per phase. So this build was definitely a big success. If you want to support the channel, the best way you can do that is just by sharing the videos with your friends. Also, feel free to upvote the Reddit thread that you'll find in the video description. That's probably the best place to ask questions, though I'll also answer questions in the comments section below. If you want to support the channel more directly, you can click the join below. If you want to support the channel more directly, you can click the join button below the video. That's similar to becoming a subscriber to someone on Twitch. Have a great day, and stay safe out there.